So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day I produced a Louis, had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithm really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could text ya whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the track Xtra. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got two old friends come to visit us in the studio today. It's Cara and it's Ralph the Monster. What are you here to do today, Cara and Ralph the Monster?
So Ralph, what's coming up? Book review.
Although I suspect that many of you think that when Richard Freeman comes up for the weekend to come and visit me here at the CFZ, that we spend the time lolling back on enormous chaise longues, watching scantily clad dancing girls, drinking fine wines and smoking bolts of raw opium. We don't do anything of the sort. When she was alive, my wife wouldn't have liked it, and now she's gone, well, we're still not doing it. What we actually do is we send Richard into the CFZ library to bring back books to review, and we do book reviews for here on the Track Extra. So, Richie, what have we got for this? Well, hang on, what have we got through the round window?
On the chaise lounge, we've got Curious Countries by our old friend Lars Thomas. This is the second part of a 2-volume set, and we will be reviewing the first part in a future episode. This is about the cryptozoology of Scandinavia, and this one concentrates on land-based cryptozoology, whereas the first one concentrated on water-based, things like sea serpents, lake monsters, water spirits and things like this. It looks at not only standard cryptozoology but also folklore, and it sort of merges into the paranormal as well. And Lars, who's a very prolific author, in Denmark he's written dozens of books, and he's written a fair few in English as well. He really does his research, because you think of Scandinavia, you think it's going to be Denmark, Finland, Norway and Sweden, but he goes really to town on this. He goes Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, where they murder whales and dolphins, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland and the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. Baltic secrets. So he looks into all of these countries and he digs up some really interesting things. Things like undiscovered species of eagles, giant seagulls, living trolls, Scandinavian dragon legends, lindorms, which are enormous serpentine limbless creatures with poisonous breath that would coil around churches and crush them and lurk in lakes and things, and they were believed in and seen right up until the 19th century, and if you link them with sea serpents and lake monsters, they're still seen today. And lots of stories about elves, goblins and Scandinavian fairies, most of which are thought to be quite dangerous and frightening, basilisks, and alongside all of this, things like new species of insect that have been discovered. And he also looks into the cultural impact of these things, like what they mean to the people in these countries and how they're reproduced on stamps and things. So as well as mysterious animals, you've got accounts of people, even in recent times, seeing strange ghostly things and spirit-like creatures in Scandinavia, and it looks into the lore and mythology of the Sami people and other things like that, and who have their own traditions of werewolves and trolls. The troll is called the Stallo in by the Sami people, and it really is probably the only book in the English language that does a deep dive into Scandinavian cryptids and folklore. So it would appeal to not just cryptozoologists but also to folklorists as well, and it's a really great book, as is the aquatic volume as well.
I think that they're both fantastic books. Here, though, in the interest of what our transatlantic chums call full disclosure, I have to say that we are the publishers of both of these books, and I would hate anybody to think that our review here is coloured by the fact that we published them ourselves, but we needed to get that out of the way. The things that interest me most about Lars's work is the way that, as Richard says, he is able to wax eloquent on trolls and sea serpents and these giant creatures which inhabit the liminal area between real life and mythology. And he also deals with the tiny creatures, like the species of spider that turned up somewhere in the middle of nowhere. It's only ever been seen the once. Nobody knows where on earth it came from or why or how. And the plague of weird red beetles that turned up in the middle of nowhere. And I find these things totally and utterly fascinating. I thought the accounts of the giant seagull were also particularly awe-inspiring, and all in all, I really cannot fault that book, even if I wanted to, which I don't.
Makes you wonder if the giant seagull is based on an albatross that's strayed up there, because there's an albatross that goes up to one of the Scottish islands, isn't there?
More than that, there's also an albatross in the North Sea at the moment. It's a different one. An albatross in the North Sea, which goes all up and down the northeastern coast of England, around Skeggy and places. And that one's also been seen in Holland. Did you know there are actually two species of albatross on the British books? Because although the famous one, the black-backed albatross, which is the one that has been in the Orkney Islands for generations, there was also a yellow-beaked, I think it was, albatross that was found somewhere in Shropshire. And nobody knows how or why. And that's one of those minor mysteries that I've always wanted to solve. Because I cannot think of a non-stupid reason for a albatross to turn up in the middle of rural Shropshire.
Which reminds me of something that happened to me on a train journey recently. I was going up to Newport Pagnell via Milton Keynes, and just before I got to Taunton from Exeter, I glanced out of the window and I saw a house that was several hundred feet away to my left, and above and beyond the house, about 40 feet in the air, and I only saw this for about 3 seconds, was an immense bird. It was grey, a uniform grey in colour, shaped like a seagull, but it didn't have the darker grey and the white. It was sort of this uniform light grey. Its body looked like it was the size of a medium-sized dog, like a basset. Its wings were half closed when I saw it, but its wingspan looked immense, as if it would have spread its wings, there'd have been something like 12 feet across. Now, the only thing I can think of was maybe it was someone flying a bird-shaped kite, although this thing looked very solid and substantial, or it was one of those devices shaped like birds of prey that they have on a tether to put above fields to stop other birds braiding their crops. But I didn't see any tether or line on it. But I only had it in view for about 3 seconds. But it looked like an albatross. It looked like a huge seagull-shaped seabird. But it was immense.
That sounds like something that the ancient mariner could have shot, and which would have haunted him for the rest of his days.
But the other thing that interests me about this book is that Lars looked into accounts of an old Scandinavian king. Now, trolls in the different parts of Scandinavia look very different. The ones in Sweden look very human, but they have cow-like tails and pointed ears. The ones in Norway are the classic trolls we think of over here, the big hairy, fierce, club-wielding monsters, and they're very similar to that in Finland as well, and in Iceland. The ones in more recent legends in Denmark look like small humans with cow-like tails and rather ugly oversized heads, and sometimes with hunchbacks. But the earlier legends from Denmark are of much more ape-like, hairy creatures. And there was one Danish king who was very fond of hunting, and Lars records the writings about him. And his favourite quarry were trolls, because he said they were so elusive and so ferocious when cornered. And the descriptions of the trolls are bigger and stronger than human beings, very muscular, covered with hair, thick brow ridges, flat noses, able to lift and hurl rocks that no man could move, and the females had long dangling breasts. They were called slattenpatten, which means floppy tits. And when this book first came out, I'd just got back from my trip to Russia in search of the Russian almasty, and the descriptions witnesses gave me of the almasty matched up exactly with the ancient Danish descriptions of trolls. So I've always thought that these relic hominins were much more widespread once than they are now, and they came a fair way into Europe. There's the famous case from 1987-88 of Afonia, which was a 8-foot tall hominin that haunted the camp that was set up by some boys on the Kolar Peninsula, and they had encounters with it for about a week, hurling rocks at them and banging on the cabin door and things. And even a local park official saw this creature as well. Now in Finland and the north of Sweden, there are still troll sightings to this day, and they sound like very, very much like some sort of hominin. So I think the troll legends are based on hominin survival.
Do you remember about 10 years ago, maybe a bit longer, that was I'll say Bigfoot, but I'm just using that as a generic term, a VHM sighting in Poland? There was a girl washing in this river who saw this thing, and it was filmed. Do you remember?
Yes, I do. There are also sightings from the Ukraine. Gregory Panchenko has recorded a number of sightings from the Ukraine of creatures exactly resembling the almasty, and there's no reason why they couldn't cross from Russia into the wilder parts of the Ukraine, because you know, borders mean nothing to animals.